the day we moved into our Maple Ridge house, our first house, our across the street neighbors came over to welcome us. And it was the beginning of a 20-year friendship. Steve, the husband, told me there's no point buying any tools that he owned or any yard machines that he owned because he liked to share, which I was happy about. And he did share over many years, many things with me. And whenever I was working on a project, he would, end up moseying on over and helping me with something. He worked from home, and so maybe he liked the distraction, I don't know, but he would come over and help me with stuff. And we'd help shovel each other's driveways. Catherine, the wife, would sometimes watch our kids. And sometimes when Maddie was running late to high school, so she would walk to high school, so they would see her running out the door late, and they would take pity on her, and unbeknownst to us, they would drive her to school. Even though we said, Maddie, you have to walk, you're late. But they would drive her. And we'd watch each other's dogs on vacation, and we'd have these wine and cheese evenings, talking late into the night. And we loved them, and they loved us. And Jesus says, there's nothing particularly special about this. His expression is, even sinners do that. Love people who love them. Now, our other across the street neighbor, his name was Bob, and he was the opposite. I like to call him Bylaw Bob, because he really liked to call bylaws. They knew him by name. And I think he retired just so he could stand in the window and manage the street on speed dial. Police, fire department, city, bylaw, whoever, tow truck company, whoever he needed to call to manage things, that's what he did from his front window. And this is what he was like. He was this very big, loud, intimidating man, big beard, big guy, and his confrontational style was yelling. He liked to just yell at you or people on the street. And anytime I could feel his opposition, anytime I was working on a project in my yard, I would just feel like, what's Bob thinking right now? What could Bob call me on right now? Who could arrive at my door because of the line I crossed? And so I had this, feeling. And when the neighborhood had a party, a block party, they didn't invite Bob. That's how it worked. And he was really like an enemy. I like to call him my neighbor-enemy, because he's a neighbor and an enemy. And so I'm making up that word, neighbor-enemy. To love Bob, this would be unnatural. It would be odd. It would be otherworldly or even miraculous. And so when we hear Jesus' message today, it's pretty normal to feel both deeply inspired and also slightly depressed. You might feel both or either of those things. There's this huge crowd gathering around Jesus, and he's preaching this message, and he just opened it with what I like to call the Dissident's Manifesto. It really covers the whole message, but really the opener, and it's expanded in Matthew. You can read a longer version of this message, and he's rewriting our understanding of blessing to be measured not in external goodies, but in kingdom alignment. And now today, Jesus is about to hit us with a series of commands that are so unreasonable and so impossible to actually live that we will be tempted to mount them on the walls as slogans and mottos that don't find their way into our everyday living. Let's read it together. I think we should. Matthew chapter 6, verses 27 to 36. This is what Jesus says. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. This is God's word. And my big idea this morning is new creation people live out an impossibly radical God-powered love. New creation people live out an impossibly radical God-powered love. Jesus sets this very high bar. Now, there already was a bar. So the Old Testament lays out some instructions on how we deal with our enemies. Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 and 5 explains that if you find your enemy's donkey walking down the street, not in his yard, loose, lost, you should return it. Not send it on its way. You should return it. Or Proverbs gives us this wisdom. Proverbs 25:21 tells us that if your enemy is hungry or thirsty, you should give them some food or drink and thus heap burning coals on their head. So I might want Bob's donkey to keep moving down the street. I might want to encourage it along, but I should return it. Or if he's hungry or not invited to the community barbecue, I shouldn't take that as a moment of glee, but I should feed him or give him something to drink. I should rise above my feelings. And then Jesus comes along and he says something completely ridiculous. Love your enemies. To those who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. And this just seems like, seriously? You guys don't seem shocked. I think maybe you've heard this so many times it's meaningless to you. Is this not shocking? It is shocking. Maybe you need to think about who's my enemy. Who's your enemy? An enemy is someone who actively opposes you. That's your enemy. So my neighbor who calls bylaws for imagined infractions? Yes. The guy in traffic who's thwarting me? Yes. For some of you, maybe the business partner who stole from you. Or the other mom who gossips about your parenting behind your back, or the coworker who sabotages your work, or the bully who sarcastically puts you down every chance they get, or the ex-spouse who maliciously lies about you. What do I do about these very real hurtful people? Jesus says in Matthew 5, in the Message paraphrase, I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer. For then you are working out of your true selves, your God-created selves. Or Paul gives instructions in 1 Corinthians 4. He says, when we are cursed, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure it. When we are slandered, we answer kindly. We have become the scum of the earth, the garbage of the world right up to this moment. Or Peter in 1 Peter 3:9 says, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. Because to this you were called so that you may inherit a blessing. Love. Expressed not in ethereal emotion, but in these very practical terms. Doing good, blessing, praying for those people. This Jesus kingdom has a subversive response to mistreatment, and it's radical love. Now, I should say as my caveat, as my warning, that sometimes love looks like boundaries. And so I want to make sure that you understand this is not a call to remain in a situation where you're experiencing abuse or violence in any way when you ought to be safe. You should remove yourself from that situation. So that's not what Jesus is saying here. And I want to make sure that's clear. Secondly, Jesus says to turn the other cheek. He says, if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also, or in maybe other translations, be strike you on the cheek. And we often think of this as like self-defense. We got this idea, this is like someone punching me. And this isn't about keeping the gloves on in a hockey game. Some of you would be happy about that. This is not about a statement on self-defense. That would be another talk. The cheek slap is a provocative insult. So I like to think of like back in the day when there's duels and people had their gloves and they're like, I challenge you to a duel. You know, that kind of thing. That slapping insult. And then the other goes, whoa, okay, let's go have a duel. It's like the provocative insult that leads to a conflict. That's what this kind of cheek slapping thing is about. So turning the cheek is to receive the provocation and not to rise to the bait. I remember coming home, we had 3 little kids at the time, and I came home to Lauren very emotional. I can't remember if she was crying in that moment, but she did cry in the interaction. And so she was and I said, what's going on? What happened? And she said, I was putting one of the kids to bed upstairs, and the other kid was juggling things, and I was trying to put him to sleep, and I couldn't get him down, and then the dog started barking outside, and I couldn't get down to bring him in, and so I couldn't get out there fast enough. And so when I went downstairs, and we knew the dog barking could annoy the neighbor. She came downstairs, the phone started ringing. She answered the phone, and as she picked it up, she could hear someone yelling, like screaming at her, just yelling. And she was like, what is this? She didn't recognize the number. And so finally she could hear, and the person just yelling. Finally she realized it was Bob, the neighbor. And so she's crying, she's telling me this, and I am so angry. How dare you call and yell at my wife with little kids? What is wrong with you? I said, I'm gonna go confront him. He needs to hear this. And I started walking down the stairs, very uncharacteristic John. I was very angry. I started going down the stairs, and I felt the Holy Spirit check me as I'm going down the stairs, and I thought, okay, that's probably good. I should pray. Okay, Lord, help me. And as I got to walking across the street, I was like, I don't even know what I'm going to say, but okay. And by the time I got to his door, I had a sense of what I was supposed to say. And so I rang the doorbell, and he opened the door. Big Bob, what? And I was like, hey, Bob, I heard that you were really upset today about the dog barking. And I just want to say I'm so sorry, because I know he's a really annoying dog. And then Bob was like, what? And I said, actually, he's so annoying when he's barking, I want to kill him, so I'm not surprised if you want to kill him. And then I was like, no, I don't want to kill him. He's not a bad dog. Like, he just barks sometimes. But and then I had a dog once. He started talking to me. And then after we got into a conversation, I could say to him, now, I want you to know that if you're upset, you should call me and talk to me. Don't yell at Lauren. She's got little kids. And we had this conversation. Romans 12 says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Jesus says, thirdly, give to everyone. He says, if someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And my first thought is, this is gonna make us all into doormats. This is crazy talk. Like, give to everyone? Jesus, do you know how many people are asking for things? You can't give to everyone. That's crazy. We shouldn't do that. And when I first looked into this years ago, I was like, what does this mean? And I found a commentator who said, it's giving to the limits of love. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. We give to the limits of love. If it's not loving to give to someone, then we don't give that. And a good example would be our kids. So my kids want things. They want ice cream and cookies all the time. And I don't give them everything they want because I love them. And so I was settled in my heart about this. I thought, this is how it is. And in Maple Ridge years ago, we had a homeless camp that it blew up. It got so huge and crazy. And it created all this controversy in Maple Ridge. People were incensed. They were angry. All the stuff that went around it, the dangerous parts to it. And people were really angry. Christians were like, we need to help. Other Christians were like, no, don't do that. You're just encouraging it. And it felt very complicated. And so, I was a pastor. I was like, okay, I don't really know what to do. It just feels complicated. We give to the limits of love. Okay, so, I don't know what's loving here. And I had a woman in our church who sent me an email. She said, I've been bringing food to the homeless camp, and I'm wondering if our church might do this too. And I wrote her back and I said, hey, I love your heart. This is a very complicated situation. And so I'm not really sure what is the best thing to do. And she wrote me back and she said, I don't think it's as complicated as you think it is. And then she wrote me this. She said, I couldn't sleep well last night because of some of the folks I saw. young men that seemed fairly clean cut, and I thought, what's their story? Why are they here? An old man in a wheelchair and a young man in a wheelchair. I know the young guy lost one of his legs to cancer, and truthfully, he did not look well, and it kind of haunted me. There was one gal who was 6.5 months pregnant, and I'm pretty sure another woman I saw was also pregnant. I saw older women and young women. One older woman, probably in her 50s, said she used to be a teacher for the deaf, and she owned her own business and things went badly, and she's now living in a tent. I think there's a real opportunity here to support and care and build relationship and share the love of Jesus. And it may start as simple as a loaf of bread and some peanut butter. John, maybe it's not as complicated as you think. Or Deuteronomy says, give freely and spontaneously. Don't have a stingy heart. The way you handle matters like this triggers God. Your God's blessing in everything you do, your work and ventures. There are always going to be poor and needy people among you, so I command you, always be generous. Open purse and hands, giving to your neighbors in trouble, your poor and hurting neighbors. And fourthly, Jesus lays out the golden rule, which is very familiar to most people in culture and in the church. In the NIV, the familiar, do to others as you would have them do to you, or the ESV is as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them, or the New American Standard, treat others the same way you want them to treat you. Now, you should know there was already a golden rule before Jesus. He's not the first one to come up with this. There was a golden rule. It just was phrased in the negative form. So it was like, don't do bad things to people and they won't do bad things to you. That's the golden rule. And it was found in lots of places. Tobit, Rabbi Hillel, he would write, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That's the whole Torah, while the rest is the commentary thereof. Go and learn it. So there was this expression of the golden rule in this negative format, which I think is very fitting. Like, I had kids at young ages, and I know their natural thing was that they understood revenge. They understood this concept of like, she hit me, I'm gonna hit her back. Or if he did nice things to me, I would do nice things back. And it's this law of diminishing returns. If you only do to someone what they're doing to you that's good, you end up with a world that gets smaller and smaller and smaller. If everyone did that, we would end up with a very small world if we all did exactly what someone else did back to us. So Jesus raises the bar. He gives a proactive command, something we do, something from nothing. The idea is that we're going to make the world into what we want it to be by doing to others what we want people to do to us. It's a powerful thing. Now, you can't do this. I'll just let you know. If you've really been listening to what I'm saying, Jesus is saying, you'll understand that you probably should feel depressed or overwhelmed, because we can't do this. We can't live this radical life. It's impossible. Left to ourselves, we would never be able to live out these commands of Jesus in real life. What's less clear in Luke's version is how much Jesus is raising the bar. If you read the Matthew version, in chapter 5 and 6, you'll hear this expression over and over. Jesus says, you've heard it said, and then he says some part of the law, and then he says, but I tell you, and he says something. So you've heard it said, don't murder, but I tell you, even if you're angry, that's like murder in your heart. And you're like, what? He does this with adultery becomes lust. Retaliation becomes outlawed. Loving your neighbor becomes loving your enemy. And Jesus in Matthew 5:20 says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Or a little bit later, he says, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father's perfect. And I think, who could live this? Who could live to this standard? Jesus, he hammers home the impossibility of it by saying, this isn't how we live normally. Loving those who love you is a normal cultural expectation. Jesus said, even sinners do that. That's like, I think, his expression for everybody. Everybody does this. Loving people who don't love you, or who can't love you back, or who are hard to love, that isn't natural. I remember once we had a big snowfall, and so the boys and I went out and we shoveled. We had a big driveway, and then we had a long sidewalk down one side of our property, so we went and shoveled that. And then I had to go to a meeting, and so I went off, and I came back, and I found out that the neighbors we loved, they had come out and started shoveling, and then they'd shoveled another neighbor, and they'd come outside, and then they shoveled together, and then they went down to the next house, and they shoveled, and now those neighbors came outside, and this huge group of neighbors started going house to house and shoveling each other's driveways all the way down the street. Like, beautiful. It was like, oh my goodness, I miss this beautiful neighborhood community moment. And then I looked over, and Bob's house was left undone, because who would shovel his walk? It's not natural. Doing good to those who do good to you is a normal cultural expectation. Jesus says everybody does this. Doing good to those who don't do good to you, or who don't deserve it, that isn't natural. Bringing cookies to my neighbor who lends me his lawnmower, that's easy. Bringing neighbors to the guy who just called bylaws on me, that's really hard. Jesus is lending to people who pay you back. That's a normal cultural expectation. Everybody does this. It's normal to evaluate the investment benefit, the default risks. How is this going to work? And before you lend or give. But giving to those who won't pay you back, or can't pay you back, or there's no visible benefit, this isn't natural. And living naturally is not a witness of God's power to the watching world. It's just what everyone does. It's not a witness. So what does God want from me? That's what a guy asked Jesus. What does God want from me? And Jesus said, love God with your whole heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And then wanting to be justified, he said, well, who's my neighbor? And then Jesus tells a very famous story that we call the Good Samaritan. Now, we know, for us, the words Good Samaritan has its own meaning. If I said, oh, you're such a good Samaritan, it would mean you're a very kind person who helps people. But for those people, then, that's not what Samaritan meant. The Samaritans were a different group of heretics, of half-breed people. They would be like, we don't interact with them. They hated each other. They wouldn't walk through each other's towns. They fight any chance they got, and maybe they'd kill each other. It was not good. And so you got to know that with the story. So Jesus tells this story of a Jewish person who's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and along the way he gets beat up by robbers. They take his clothes and all his stuff, and they leave him in the ditch to die. And he's lying there all bloody, beaten, he's half dead. And along comes a priest traveling to Jerusalem. Oh, he's going to the temple. He sees this guy, and he goes by on the other side of the road. I'm going to church, so I got a sermon to do. I can't help. It won't work for me. So he goes off to temple. And then along comes a Levite, a worship leader, singing, how great is our God. And oh my goodness, and sees the guy there. And he goes by on the other side of the road. I can't help. I have important ministry to do. And so he goes off. And then Jesus says, along comes a Samaritan. Now, the closest thing probably for you to understand would be if I said, along comes a Palestinian. That would be how they hear it. So when they hear Samaritan, they're thinking, oh, this is the part where the Samaritan chokes out the Jewish guy, or rolls him over into the ditch, or makes sure he's dead. But instead, Jesus says, this guy takes him and puts him on his own animal, and then brings him to an end, tends to his wounds himself, binds up the wounds and the bruises, and then pays the innkeeper with his own money so that he will have a place to recover. Who's the good neighbor? Jesus says it isn't enough just to love your neighbor. You need to love your enemy. G.K. Chesterton said, the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies, probably because generally they're the same people. He knew something about neighbor enemies, like I do. You can't do this, or you can, with an asterisk. Corrie ten Boom tells this story in the book, Reflections of God's Glory, how she met a man in Africa and his hands were bandaged. And she asked him, what happened to your hands? And he told her how he burned his hands helping his neighbor put out the fire on his roof. And that's how he burned his hands. And then she goes on and she writes, later I heard the whole story from other people. The neighbor hated him and had set his roof on fire while his wife and children were asleep in the hut, and they were in great danger. Fortunately, he was able to put out the fire in his own house in time. But sparks from that fire traveled over to the house of the man who'd set the fire, and his house caught fire. And then this man had such a love for his enemy that he did everything he could to put out that fire, and that's how he burned his hands, putting out his neighbor's house fire. Now, I hear this story and a part of me says, wow, that is amazing. And the other part of me feels slightly depressed. Like, how is this possible? This seems so hard to do in real life. If I picture my real life and your real life, this seems really hard. How are we going to do this? I need to tell you, you can't do this with your willpower or discipline or better habits. You can only do this by the power of God's Spirit alive in you, transforming your heart. This is talked about all through the Bible. Ezekiel 36, God says, and I will put my Spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Or Galatians 5:16, Paul writes, so I say, walk by the Spirit. Or later says, keep in step with the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Or Hebrews 8:10, quoting an Old Testament passage, this is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. This is about Spirit-empowered followers, like the law tattooed on our hearts. Not on lists, not on tablets that we can check boxes on, but written inside of us somehow. We belong to him, and so we can, and we do live this way. That's the asterisk. Jesus explains what motivates us to do this or live this way. And the first thing he says is, your reward will be great. Which I think is so funny because we're all the time telling each other, don't do it for any reason other than just it's good. Like, the last shall be first. Okay, well, I want to be last so that I'll be first. No, don't do that. No, you just want to be last. Or I want to do it for the reward. There's no, that's bad. Then you're doing it for the wrong motivation. You just need to be altruistic. Just do it for the good of good. And we have this sense, especially if you grew up in church. I know you'll have thought this. And here, this is different. This is strange. Jesus says, for the reward, this motivates us. Or Paul talks about it too. Ephesians 6:8, he says, because you know that the Lord will reward each of you for whatever good they do. Like, that's why we're doing this? Wow, okay. We got to get our head around that. There is a reward, and it's good. Secondly, Jesus says, you will be children of the Most High. Now, I think as soon as I hear this, I think, this is our great fear. I think a lot of us read something like this and we think, okay, this is what I'm worried about. If I do enough, then I will be a child of the Most High. Like, am I doing enough? Am I good enough? Like, I don't know if I'm in the group yet. And we got it backwards because Jesus isn't saying you will be, as in if you do this good stuff, then you will be in God's family. But he's saying if you do this, you will demonstrate you are part of God's family. You'll be acting like God's family when you do this. Or my example I thought of was Miriam is doing the speech competition at school. And she's our fifth born, so we have 4 other kids who've come through. And all of our other kids have done speech competitions and won many, many awards throughout the years, provincials and districts in all different places. So there's this history in our family of doing well in speech competitions. And if Miriam came to me and said, finally, now I'm a Headley, I would say, whoa, what? I would say, no. You're not doing well so that you're a Headley. You do well because you're a Headley. This is just like Headleys are trained up in this way from birth. We force you to do this. No. It's semantics, but it is important. We're not doing good things so that we're part of God's family. We do good things because we are part of God's family, and this is what it's like. Thirdly, Jesus says, because he is kind, or we could say, because this is what God is like. This is what motivates us to live this way. The Greek word there that says be merciful has an element of becoming. So this progress, this process, God is a good father who's helping us to be merciful, but also as we become like him, we're becoming merciful. God loved his enemies, us, at some time when we were far away. God is gracious and good to those who don't follow him. And God gives generously, faithful to provide what we need as we come and ask him. This is what God is like. And as we look at him as our Father and imitate him, we become like him. Matthew 5:48, Jesus says, in a word, what I'm saying is grow up. Your kingdom subjects now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously toward others the way God lives toward you. In conclusion, new creation people live out an impossibly radical God-powered love. You know that when Bob died, we were friends in our way. I wept when he died. Over the years, eagle-eyed Bob ended up chasing robbers off our property. And I helped him mediate a conflict with one of the other neighbors. Occasionally, he'd bring over some old things or books from his basement for our kids. He even gave me his extra snowblower, which I still have. Somehow, none of this felt like me, because I know how I felt. This is the kingdom at work, in and through and around me. God doing something I could never do on my own. Jesus raises this bar impossibly high. Love those who oppose me, ignore an insult, give to everyone who asks, actively impact the world for good. We can't do this. We can't. If we're honest, we know this. It's just too hard. This isn't what normal people do. This isn't what we or anyone else would expect. And we can, with an asterisk. And the asterisk is important because it isn't an effort of willpower. This isn't a new moral law Jesus is giving. This is new creation living. And it happens because we're transformed by Jesus. And we're motivated by the big reward he's talking about. And because this is how God's family works. And because this is what God is like. He is merciful. And as we become like him, the world changes around us. Would you pray with me? Jesus, so often you're saying things that sometimes are hard to understand, or in this case, maybe really clear to understand and really hard to apply if we really take what you're saying at face value. And so, Jesus, we come and we admit our weakness, our inability to be these people on our own. It's just not our natural way. And yet we hear you calling us into a new kingdom life, into new creation living, and we invite you to come by your Spirit and transform us, to make us into this people who could live this way and be a witness to the watching world. Jesus, only you can do this, and so we ask that you would help us, get our attention, make us aware of your voice and your leading in each moment, in each situation, in each relationship. What do you want to do in and through us? What would this look like? Thank you that you're faithful to finish what you start. We do love you. Amen.